Hi, I'm Greg Alderman. Welcome to One Voice Board. Today we're going to be talking about the role of the board in relationship to the pastor, and I'm going to use one of my favorite metaphors. If you find this helpful, please make a comment below. And of course, if you want to be the first to get new material produced by One Voice Board, go ahead and subscribe. All right, let's dive right in. One of the first things a board has to do is it has to organize itself, and it has to answer the question, why? Why do we exist? Now I'm going to use a metaphor to teach today, and I'm going to try it on the whiteboard, so I hope you follow along and I hope it's meaningful for you. I want you to imagine with me that there's a tribe, an ancient tribe that's moved into a new area, right? And I'm rendering it in this space, and this tribe of elders gathers together. They realize, hey, if we're going to have a home base, because they've been wandering, if we're going to have a home base, we need to build housing for the people. We need to have a place to worship. We need to have a place to educate our children and future generations. We need to be able to provide power for our people. And of course, the first priority, we have to feed them. They have to be able to eat. So they gather around the tree. They agree on the priorities. And they find one among themselves, a first among equals, if you will, who's going to be the tribal chief. And what they do is they take that tribal chief who's agreed with the priorities, and they send him to the top of the tree. And he gets way up there, and he's sitting there holding his binoculars. And what he's going to do is he's going to start to organize the work of the tribe. He's got 5 priorities that he agreed upon. Now, the 5 priorities shape the way he's going to do his work. And he, of course, needs to have leaders elected for each one of those priorities. So he finds a guy that he trusts and he says, hey, listen, I want you to build the tribal housing over here in this area. And then he finds another person who he says, listen, you're going to build the place of worship, and you're also going to not only design and build the location, but you're going to organize the worship. And we're going to put it right in the center of our life together. Okay? He has another leader that is in charge of education, and they decide that they're going to put the place of education. Now bear with me, this is going to be a bell to represent education, where the school's going to be. And part of the thinking, of course, of the leader is he's sitting up there thinking, hey, listen, when our children walk to school, one of the primary things I want them to see is the heart of our community, the place that we worship together as they go to be educated for the future of the tribe. Now, of course, I've left 2 important components out. One is power, and the other one is the ag, the food that they're going to need. And in this town or in this area where they decided to settle, there's a river. And you can see I try to indicate the flow of the river from that direction down to this direction. It's important that I do this for a couple of reasons, and I'll come back to it later. But it matters where you put the place where the town produces power, doesn't it? Compared to food. A smart leader, someone who organizes, is going to realize, I don't want the place where I produce my food to be downstream from the place where I produce my power. So I'm going to have the guy producing the food, and here's my apple. That's a sad apple, to represent the place where we're producing food. And downstream, we are going to produce power, electricity, okay, for the town. Of course, one of the other things, a project that's going to need to be shared by all, is the building of a bridge for those who need to go work in those areas. So there are things, for example, among the 5 different groups that are working where they might share a project together. Now, the leader is organizing the work, and he has lieutenants. In the Navy, when we had those kind of organizations, you would call them department heads. There's the captain up the tree. Department heads taking care of things, and within each department there's a group of leaders and workers in order to accomplish each of the 5 priorities. So what is the role now of the tribal elders? Well, there's a couple things I want to plant as ideas for you understanding your relationship in the board. And the first one is partnership and protection. partnership and protection. And we call this spears out. The tribal elders are around the tree with their spears out because they've partnered with the chief to accomplish what they've agreed to do together as a tribe to build a place to live and thrive, okay? And the protection, of course, is protecting the chief as he's making decisions and directing his lieutenants. Because it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand this. You can casually observe the culture we live in. Anytime a leader makes a decision, there's going to be people who disagree. Just like in your church or your nonprofit. There's going to be people who disagree with what the board, what the tribal elders have said. So, what the tribal elders do is they're around the tree and they have their spears out to protect the chief as he's partnered with them to accomplish their goal. And one of the people they're going to protect the chief from is tribal unrest. Because if the chief is up the tree doing what they've agreed together, what they partnered together to do, then they of course need to protect him. There's another phrase I want to use for you to understand this concept of the role of the tribal elders, okay? And this one is a little different. Let me erase my spears here for a second. And I'm going to use the phrase purpose and accountability. So the elders have the role of purpose, the purpose for why they exist, and accountability. And this one we call spears up. Kind of an interesting thing, right? Spears up. What do I mean by this? I want you to imagine that the chief goes up the tree, but he's not really doing what they agreed that he was going to be doing. He's not focusing on the 5 priorities. He's not making sure and ensuring that the work that they agreed needs to be done. Well, they need to have spears up because that guy needs to be held accountable because he's not fulfilling the purpose for which they agreed. There's another aspect of this spears up analogy that I really love that the board has a responsibility to do, and that's the evaluation of the pastor or the executive and to hold him accountable to do his job and not do the jobs of his underlings. You see, a lot of people get to be leaders in organizations because at one time they were the guy in charge of worship, or they were the guy in charge of housing, or they were the guy in charge of the power. And they were excellent leaders. And so they got promoted when a new tribe was formed to be the new chief. But when things get tough, this is very common for leaders, they kind of want to climb out of the tree. Maybe if you're a pastor watching this, you can relate to this. You're thinking to yourself, I just want to go back to being a youth pastor, man. This senior pastor thing is hard. And so can you imagine the chief saying, hey, I just want to go back to over here working in the power company. Nobody bothered me there. I did a good job. I know exactly how to do it. So he tries to climb down out of the tree. Well, guess what the spears up are about? To keep him up in the tree to do his job. And you know what? I've been in that role. And for those of you watching who are in that role, I need to be held accountable to be focused on the main thing that I'm doing that no one else in the tribe is assigned to do. Because if the chief's not up there doing that job, then nobody's doing that job. So as understanding your role as a board member, I want you to think about this metaphor. You've heard it. I'm going to put it all together. Your job as a board is to have spears out when you partner and protect your lead pastor or your chief executive. When that person is up in the tree, directing the organization according to the agreements you made together, then you need to protect that person because they've partnered with you in the most important work of your organization. And you need to have spears up. You need to think about purpose and accountability. If that chief up the tree is not fulfilling the purpose of the organization that you agreed on together, and or is not doing the job that they agreed to do, they need to be held accountable. So spears up and spears out. I love that metaphor for understanding the role of the board. Hey, If you have questions about this or anything else that you think that One Voice Board can help you with, don't hesitate to reach out to us at greg@onevoiceboard.org.